A millionaire made a bet and married a pregnant widow with 7 children. He thought it was just a game, but things didn't go according to plan. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Andrew Carradine had never lost a bet, not once in his 36 years of life. The CEO of Carradine Capital, one of the most powerful investment firms on Wall Street, he had built his empire on calculated risks, ruthless decisions, and an unshakable belief in his own superiority. Money, power, influence, he had it all. He controlled everything around him, and the world bent to his will. For Andrew, life was a constant game of chess, and every move was designed to ensure his victory. People were pieces, opportunities were strategies, and the ultimate goal was domination. He had spent years perfecting this game, making deals that crushed competitors and built his empire. He was used to winning, and more importantly, he was used to people expecting him to win. That was why, on a warm Friday night in an exclusive Manhattan club, surrounded by other billionaires and corporate heirs, Andrew's confidence never wavered, even when his closest friend and rival, Lawrence Berkeley, smirked across the table and said, "You always play it safe, Andy. You never take a bet unless you're sure you'll win." The laughter from the men around them was light-hearted, but Andrew could feel the challenge beneath it. Lawrence, the heir to a shipping fortune and an old-money aristocrat, had always loved pushing Andrew's buttons. They had grown up in the same elite circles, attended the same Ivy League schools, and now sat at the top of their respective industries. Andrew leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I take risks every day, Lawrence. They just happen to be calculated ones." "Exactly my point," Lawrence replied, his smirk widening. "You only take risks when you know you can control the outcome. You don't actually gamble." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "I built an empire from nothing. That wasn't a gamble?" Lawrence waved a dismissive hand. "That was strategy. I'm talking about real risk, something unpredictable, something outside your comfort zone." The conversation caught the attention of the others at the table, men whose fortunes had been inherited rather than earned, men who thrived on empty displays of power and reckless spending. Andrew rarely indulged in their games, but tonight there was something in Lawrence's tone that made him listen. "All right," Andrew said. "What kind of bet are we talking about?" Lawrence's eyes gleamed. He had been waiting for this. "A marriage bet." A murmur of interest swept through the group. Andrew chuckled. "Marriage? That's not a bet. That's a life sentence." "That's exactly why it's a challenge," Lawrence countered. "You see, Andy, you've had it easy. Every woman you've ever been with has fit into your world perfectly. Models, executives, socialites, they come from the same elite circles. They know the rules, and more importantly, they want the life you can give them." He leaned forward. "But what if you had to marry someone completely outside your world?" Andrew's smile faltered slightly. "Define outside my world." "No CEOs, no models, no women from money or influence," Lawrence said. "I mean someone completely ordinary, someone who wouldn't give a damn about your wealth." Andrew scoffed. "You think there's a woman alive who wouldn't care about my wealth?" Lawrence grinned. "That's what makes it a challenge." There was a pause before another man at the table, Victor Langston, chuckled. "I've got the perfect candidate." He pulled out his phone and scrolled for a moment before turning the screen to Andrew. "Meet Regina Walker." Andrew glanced at the screen. The photo was of a woman in her late 20s or early 30s, standing in a grocery store parking lot. She was holding the hands of 2 young children, while several others stood close by. Her hair was tied back, and exhaustion was evident in her expression. She's 30, a widow, and a mother of 7, Victor continued. And she's pregnant with her 8th kid, lives in a rundown apartment in Brooklyn, works 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. He smirked. She's the opposite of everything you know. The men laughed, expecting Andrew to scoff and dismiss the idea. Instead, he studied the image for a moment longer. A single mother of 7, pregnant, living paycheck to paycheck. She was the definition of struggle. That's insane, someone else muttered. She'd never say yes, another added. But Andrew wasn't listening to them. He was thinking about the challenge, about the impossibility of it. Lawrence leaned back, watching him. 1 year, if you marry her and actually live with her as a husband, if you last 12 months without bailing, you win. And in return, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black folder, placing it on the table. 10% of Burke Oil. The room went silent. Burke Oil was one of the most powerful energy conglomerates in the country, a company Andrew had been trying to get a stake in for years. Those 10% shares were worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but more importantly, they would give him a foothold in an industry he had been locked out of. For the first time, the bet wasn't just about proving something, it was about power. Andrew met Lawrence's gaze. "You're serious?" "As serious as you are about winning," Lawrence said. Andrew considered his options. This was absurd. He had never even met this woman. A year was a long time to be tied to someone he had no connection to. But then again, when had he ever turned down a challenge? "All right," he said, setting his glass down. "I'll do it." The men around the table erupted into cheers and laughter, already taking bets on how long he would last. Lawrence grinned. "Then I suggest you go find yourself a wife." As the night went on, Andrew sat back, the weight of his decision settling in. He didn't know anything about Regina Walker beyond what Victor had told him. He didn't know what kind of life she lived, what struggles she faced, but that didn't matter, because Andrew Carradine never lost. And he wasn't about to start now. Regina Walker had stopped believing in miracles a long time ago. At 30 years old, she had experienced enough hardship to last a lifetime. Once, she had dreams, hopes of a stable life, a warm home filled with love, and a future where she could finally rest. But life had never made things easy for her. Instead, it had thrown one obstacle after another in her path, each one heavier than the last. She had been married once. Her husband, Marcus, had been the love of her life, the man who had promised to stand by her no matter what. Together, they had built a life, not an easy one, but a real one. He had worked as a mechanic while she did whatever she could, waitressing, cleaning houses, even babysitting for extra money, just to make ends meet. But despite the struggles, they had been happy. Then, one night, everything had changed. A car accident had taken Marcus away from her in an instant. One moment he was leaving for a late shift, kissing her goodbye with a tired smile, and the next he was gone. Hit by a drunk driver who walked away with nothing more than a scratch. Regina had been 5 months pregnant at the time. Alone, grieving, and suddenly the sole provider for their children, she had no choice but to keep moving forward. There had been no time for mourning, not when there were bills to pay, mouths to feed, and no safety net to catch them. In the years since Marcus's death, she had done everything she could to keep her family afloat. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices in the early morning, helping in a school cafeteria during the day, and stocking shelves at a grocery store late at night. There were days when she went without food to make sure her children had enough. Nights when exhaustion made her bones ache, but she still stayed up sewing patches on their worn clothes because she couldn't afford new ones. And now, with another baby on the way, things were getting worse. The bills were piling up faster than she could handle, and the landlord had started making comments about rent being late. She had already sold anything of value. The idea of asking for help burned her pride, but she had reached a point where she had no other options. She had no time for hope, no time for fantasies. So when a stranger in a tailored suit showed up at the grocery store where she worked, looking so out of place that the other employees whispered about him, she barely spared him a glance. He was clearly someone from the other side of the world, the kind of man who had never known hunger, never worried about an eviction notice. She had seen men like him before, walking through life with the arrogance of those who had never struggled. When he stopped in front of her, she sighed, ready to direct him to customer service. Regina Walker? Her body tensed. He knew her name. She turned, her brow furrowing as she took in the man before her. Tall, sharply dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her yearly income, with an expression that looked both confident and calculating. "Who's asking?" she replied, shifting her basket of canned goods onto her hip. "My name is Andrew Carradine," he said. "I have a business proposition for you." Regina almost laughed. A business proposition? What kind of business could a man like him possibly have with a woman like her? "Not interested," she said flatly, turning back to her work. "I think you might want to hear this," he continued. "It could change your life." Something about his tone made her pause. She looked at him again, narrowing her eyes. He didn't look like a man who wasted time. Whatever he was here for, he was serious. "Look, I don't know what you think you're selling, but I don't have money for it," she said. "I'm not selling anything," Andrew said smoothly. "I'm offering something." Regina crossed her arms. "Offering what?" $1 million. The words hit her like a brick. She blinked, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me?" "If you agree to marry me," Andrew continued, his voice cool and controlled, as if he were discussing a simple contract, "I will provide you with $1 million, no strings attached." For a long moment, Regina could only stare at him. Then she did laugh, shaking her head. "You're insane." "I assure you I'm not," he replied. "This is a legitimate offer." Regina's mind raced. There was no way this was real. No man, especially one like him, would just throw away that kind of money. "What's the catch?" she demanded. "The marriage has to last at least 1 year," he said. "You and your children would move into my home. You would live as my wife, publicly and legally." Regina's stomach twisted. "Why?" "That's not relevant," he said. "All you need to know is that at the end of 1 year, you will walk away with the money, no obligations beyond the duration of the marriage." She studied him, trying to find the hidden trick. He was watching her with an unsettling level of patience, like a man who already knew the answer. "I don't even know you," she said. "You don't have to," Andrew replied. "This isn't about love, it's a transaction. You need financial security, and I need a wife for a year." It was absurd, completely ridiculous. And yet, Regina found herself thinking about it. $1 million. That kind of money could change everything. She could move out of their tiny, run-down apartment. She could get proper medical care for her pregnancy. She could finally give her children stability, a future that wasn't dictated by how many shifts she could work in a week. But it was also dangerous. Trusting a man like him, it went against every survival instinct she had. Andrew watched her as if sensing her hesitation. "I understand this is overwhelming," he said. "Take a day to think about it. I'll be back tomorrow for your answer." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Regina standing there, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. That night, she lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her bedroom. Her youngest son, Caleb, curled against her side, breathing softly in his sleep. Across the room, her other children were sprawled out on the thin mattresses they shared. She thought about the rent, the groceries she couldn't afford, the exhaustion that had settled into her bones. Then she thought about a future where she wouldn't have to worry about those things. By morning, she knew her answer. When Andrew Caradon returned, she was ready. "I'll do it," she said, "but let's get one thing straight. I'm not some trophy for you to parade around. I'm doing this for my kids, not for you." Andrew smiled. Understood. But as Regina shook his hand, sealing the deal, a nagging feeling told her that she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life. The wedding was nothing more than a formality. A quick visit to City Hall, a signature on a marriage certificate, and it was done. No white dress, no flowers, no ceremony. Just a cold, legal transaction between two people from completely different worlds. Regina had expected it to feel strange. And it did, but not in the way she had thought. There was no romantic illusion to shatter. She had never believed this was anything more than a deal. What unsettled her was the sheer detachment in Andrew's demeanor. He treated the entire event like a business merger, speaking to the clerk at City Hall with the same calculated precision he probably used in board meetings. When the time came to say, "I do," his tone was flat, uninterested, as if he were signing off on a routine contract rather than committing to a year of marriage. Regina didn't expect tenderness, but something about his complete lack of emotion left her with an uneasy feeling. After it was over, he turned to her and said, "I'll have a car pick up you and the children tomorrow morning. Be ready by 8. That was it. No celebratory dinner, no discussion about what came next. Just a simple directive before he walked away. Regina watched him go, exhaling slowly. What had she gotten herself into? The next morning, just before 8, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of her apartment building. Regina had spent the night making sure everything was packed. Clothes, toys, the few personal belongings they owned. Her children stood around the small living room, some excited, others nervous. "Where are we going again?" asked Jackson, her 9-year-old, adjusting his worn-out backpack. "To our new home," Regina answered. The words felt foreign on her tongue. Could she even call it that? 12-year-old Naomi eyed her skeptically. "For how long?" Regina hesitated before answering. "A year." Naomi frowned, but didn't press the issue. She was old enough to know that her mother wouldn't be doing this unless there was a good reason. When they stepped outside, the sight of the massive SUV waiting for them was enough to make the younger children gasp. It looked like something out of a movie. A man in a dark suit opened the door for them. "Mrs. Carradine," he said, nodding. Regina flinched at the title. The children climbed in first, their eyes wide as they took in the luxurious leather seats and the built-in screens. To them, this was like stepping into another world. As they drove through the city, Regina held her youngest son, Caleb, on her lap. She watched the streets change, the old, worn-down buildings of her neighborhood fading into sleek skyscrapers and high-end boutiques. Then, finally, they arrived. The Caradine estate was massive. A sprawling mansion set on acres of land, with pristine gardens and a driveway long enough to make the building itself seem almost distant. Regina swallowed hard. This wasn't just wealth. This was power. As the car came to a stop, Andrew was already waiting at the entrance, dressed in his usual tailored suit, his posture impeccable. Her children hesitated as they climbed out of the car, sticking close to Regina as they took in the sight before them. Andrew's gaze swept over them before settling on her. "You're late." Regina stiffened. "By 5 minutes. "Punctuality matters," he said simply. Then he turned on his heel and walked inside, expecting her to follow. Regina clenched her jaw but didn't argue. The moment they stepped inside, the children gasped again. The grand foyer was something out of a palace, with polished marble floors, a sweeping staircase, and a chandelier that looked like it cost more than their old apartment building. A woman in a crisp uniform stepped forward. "I'm Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper. I'll be assisting you with anything you need." Regina didn't know what to say. She had never lived in a place where there was someone hired to assist her. The children, meanwhile, had already started exploring, their awe evident. Except for Tristan. Her 14-year-old stood at the entrance, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" Regina asked, stepping closer to him. Tristan's jaw tightened. "Are we supposed to pretend this is normal?" Regina sighed. "No, but this is where we live now." "For a year," he muttered. Before she could say anything else, Andrew returned. "Your rooms are upstairs," he said. "Mrs. Holloway will show you where everything is. Dinner is at 7. I expect everyone to be there." Then, just like that, he was gone again. That night, as Regina settled into what was now her room, a space bigger than her entire apartment, she couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of wrongness. The house was too big, too cold, too quiet. She had spent so many years in cramped spaces, surrounded by the constant noise of her children. Now, in this massive house, everything felt empty. At dinner, the tension was thick. The children were still in awe of their surroundings, but there was a hesitancy to their excitement, as if they weren't sure how much of it was real. Andrew sat at the head of the long dining table, barely speaking. He ate with the same precise efficiency he seemed to do everything else with. At one point, little Caleb accidentally knocked over his glass of water. The sound echoed in the silent dining room. Regina immediately reached to clean it up, but before she could, Andrew had already snapped his fingers. A staff member rushed forward with a cloth, wiping up the spill as if nothing had happened. Regina tensed. She was used to doing everything herself. The idea of someone else handling it so quickly, so mechanically, unsettled her. Across the table, Tristan was watching Andrew carefully, his eyes narrowed. After dinner, when she finally got a moment alone with her eldest son, he wasted no time. "This isn't real," he said. Regina sighed. "What do you mean?" "This." He gestured to the massive house around them. "All of this. It's not ours, and he's not family." Regina ran a hand through her hair. "I know that." Tristan's eyes darkened. "Then why are we here?" She didn't have an easy answer, so instead she said, "Because it's what we need right now." Tristan exhaled sharply. "I don't trust him." Regina hesitated. "Neither do I." For a long moment they stood there in silence. Then Tristan turned to her. "Then why did you marry him?" Regina met his gaze. "For you, for all of you." It was the only truth she could give him. That night, she lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the quiet of the house. She had married a man she didn't know, moved into a world that wasn't hers. She had done it for her children, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the feeling that she had just stepped into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Andrew Carradine had built his life around control. He controlled his business, his investments, his time, Everything was structured, efficient, and predictable. Now, sitting in his own home, surrounded by 8 children who were definitely not part of his controlled environment, he realized just how little power he had over this situation. The first few days after Regina and her children moved in were nothing short of chaos. Andrew had never lived with children before, let alone 8 of them. He had expected some level of disruption, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. There was noise everywhere. At 6 in the morning, before his alarm even had a chance to go off, the house was already alive with energy. Footsteps thundered down the hallways. Someone was always arguing, someone was always laughing, and someone, usually Caleb the youngest, was always getting into trouble. Andrew, a man used to waking up in silence and starting his day with a structured routine, found himself lying awake in bed at dawn, listening to the chaos unfold outside his door. At first, he ignored it. He had no intention of playing a real husband or father. The arrangement had been simple. Regina and the children would live here, and he would go about his business. He wasn't here to bond with anyone. He wasn't here to parent. But the thing about children, especially this many children, was that they didn't care about contracts or agreements. They were everywhere. At breakfast, Jackson and Miles bickered over who got to sit closest to their mother. Caleb knocked over a glass of juice nearly every morning. Naomi, sharp and observant, studied Andrew like he was some kind of science experiment. And Treston barely looked at him at all. Andrew didn't mind the others as much. They were children, loud, messy, but ultimately harmless. Treston, on the other hand, was different. The 14-year-old had been watching him since the day they moved in, his dark eyes filled with something Andrew couldn't quite define. Contempt, maybe. Mistrust. Andrew had spent his entire life navigating boardrooms filled with men trying to undermine him. He recognized a challenge when he saw one. But the truth was, he didn't care what Treston thought of him. This wasn't real. He wasn't here to impress them. He wasn't here to earn their approval. Still, it was difficult to ignore the way Treston made his presence known. Not through words, but through silence. He never spoke directly to Andrew, never acknowledged him beyond a glare or a scoff. If there was anyone who could ruin the carefully constructed illusion of this marriage, it was him. And Andrew didn't have time for it. He stuck to his plan. He left for work early, returning late in the evening, ensuring that his interactions with Regina and the children remained minimal. It worked for a while. But then, one evening, everything changed. Regina had spent the last 2 weeks trying to settle her children into this new life. She had kept her expectations low, knowing this arrangement wasn't meant to last forever. Still, there were small things she hadn't anticipated, like how difficult it would be for the younger ones to adjust to the sheer size of the house. It was too big, too quiet in a way that felt unnatural to them. Back in their old apartment, the walls had been thin, the space cramped, but at least they had always felt together. Here, her children were suddenly overwhelmed by all the empty space. They clung to each other more than usual. And then there was Treston. Her eldest had always been protective, but here he was angry. She understood why. This wasn't just a change. It was an upheaval of everything they knew. And on top of that, Treston had lost the small sense of control he had over their lives. Before, he had been the man of the house. Now, in this new world, he was just another kid in a stranger's home. She wished she could make him see that she had done this for them, not to hurt them. But that wasn't something she could explain in words. That night, As she tucked the younger ones into bed, she heard raised voices coming from the hallway. Andrew and Tristan. She closed her eyes, exhaling. This was bound to happen. She stepped out just in time to hear Tristan's voice, sharp and angry. "You don't get to tell me what to do." Andrew's reply was calm, but there was an edge to it. "This is my house." "Yeah, well, we didn't ask to be here." Regina hurried forward. "What's going on?" Tristan turned to her, his face flushed with frustration. "He's trying to tell me what I can and can't do." Regina looked at Andrew. "What happened?" Andrew crossed his arms. "I found him in the garage." Tristan scoffed. "I wasn't stealing anything." "I didn't say you were," Andrew replied, "but it's dangerous, and you have no business being there." Regina sighed, turning to her son. "Tristan, what were you doing in there?" He hesitated. That was enough of an answer. Regina softened. "I get it. You want space. But sneaking around isn't the way to get it." Tristan's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have married him." The words hit harder than she expected. Andrew's expression remained unreadable, but something in his posture stiffened. Regina exhaled. "Go to bed, Tristan." He didn't argue, but as he walked away, the tension in the hallway lingered. Andrew finally looked at her. "This isn't working." Regina raised an eyebrow. "What part of it? The deal, or the fact that you now have to live with people who actually exist?" His expression darkened. "I didn't sign up to be a babysitter." Regina gave him a hard look. "And I didn't sign up to be your charity project, but here we are." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Andrew exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. "This was supposed to be simple," he muttered. Regina almost laughed. "Then maybe you should have married someone without 8 kids." He didn't reply. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Regina standing there, more exhausted than she had been in years. The next morning, Andrew did something he hadn't planned on doing. He stayed home. It wasn't intentional. He had woken up as usual, dressed for work, but as he reached for his car keys, something made him pause. Maybe it was the conversation with Regina. Maybe it was the way Tristan had looked at him, like he was nothing more than another temporary problem in their lives. Whatever it was, instead of leaving, he found himself sitting in the living room, watching as the chaos of the morning unfolded. And for the first time, he really saw them. Naomi helping Jackson tie his shoes. Miles and Ezra fighting over the last pancake. Caleb climbing onto Regina's lap, yawning against her shoulder. They weren't just kids. They were a family. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Andrew realized that he wasn't just an outsider in their home. He was an intruder in theirs. Something in his chest tightened. He didn't like it, but he also didn't look away. For the first time in his life, Andrew Carradine didn't feel like he was in control. He had always believed in structure, in predictability. He had built his fortune by anticipating market trends, making calculated risks, and ensuring that every decision was one that led to success. But no financial model could have prepared him for what it was like to live in a house with 8 children, nor for the way his carefully curated world had begun to unravel. Something had shifted in the past few weeks. He had begun to notice things that had once seemed irrelevant. How Caleb's laughter echoed through the halls, how Naomi scrunched her nose when she was thinking, how Tristan watched him with cautious skepticism whenever they were in the same room. More than that, he had begun to notice Regina, not just as the woman he had legally married, but as a person. A mother who had spent years sacrificing every part of herself for her children. A woman who had stepped into his world not because she wanted to, but because she had to. And now, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, surrounded by the children who had slowly but surely forced their way into his carefully constructed life, Andrew realized something unsettling. This had stopped feeling like a game. He had entered into this arrangement thinking it would be simple, a year-long contract, a financial transaction, but it was no longer just a bet. It was real. And that was dangerous. Because if there was one thing Andrew had never prepared for, it was the possibility that he might actually care. Regina had noticed the change in him. She wasn't sure when it had started. Maybe it was the morning she caught him in the kitchen, struggling to make coffee while Caleb clung to his leg, babbling about dinosaurs. Maybe it was the way he had started asking questions about the kids. Small things, like what subjects Naomi liked in school or which toy was Caleb's favorite. Maybe it was the way he had stopped treating her like a burden and started seeing her. At first, she had assumed it was just a trick, a calculated move to make their arrangement seem more authentic. But as the days passed, she found herself questioning that assumption. She had spent so many years relying on herself, never expecting anyone to step in. But now there was someone who was stepping in. Someone who, for reasons she couldn't understand, was starting to feel present. And that terrified her, because she couldn't afford to believe in something that wasn't real. Not again. Not when she had spent years learning that men like Andrew Carradine didn't just change. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. Regina had been out running errands, picking up school supplies and groceries, when she overheard two women whispering in the next aisle. Normally, she wouldn't have paid attention, but then she heard Andrew's name. Curious, she moved closer, just enough to catch the conversation. "Did you hear about Carradine's latest stunt?" one of the women said, laughing. "Married some poor single mother with a litter of kids. Apparently, it's part of some ridiculous bet." Regina's heart stopped. "What bet?" the other woman asked. The first woman scoffed. "Some challenge between him and his rich friends. They dared him to marry the most unfit woman possible, someone completely outside his world. If he lasts a year, he gets a massive investment deal." Regina's blood ran cold. A bet. A bet. The words echoed in her mind, colliding with every small, fragile piece of trust she had started to build. She didn't wait to hear more. Grabbing her things, she left the store, her hands trembling as she clutched the bags. Had she really been this stupid? Had she actually started to believe, just for a second, that this marriage had become something more than just a transaction? By the time she reached the house, her entire body was shaking. She stormed inside, barely registering the kids calling out to her, and found Andrew in his office. He looked up, startled by the way she slammed the door behind her. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he asked, frowning. Regina threw the grocery bag onto his desk. "Tell me the truth." His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" She took a shaky breath. "Is this a bet?" Something flickered in his expression. It was quick, so quick that if she hadn't been watching closely, she might have missed it. But she was watching, and she saw the guilt, the confirmation. Her stomach twisted. "Oh my God," Andrew exhaled, setting his pen down. "Regina." "Don't," she snapped. "Don't you dare try to talk your way out of this." His jaw tightened. "It's not what you think." "No?" she said, voice shaken. "So you didn't make some disgusting wager with your rich friends about whether or not you could marry me?" Silence. Regina let out a bitter laugh. "I should have known. I did know. She stopped, shaking her head. You made me think." She swallowed hard. Andrew stood, his face unreadable. "Regina, listen to me." "I don't want to listen to you," she snapped. "I want to get out of this house." She turned towards the door, but before she could reach it, Andrew stepped forward, blocking her path. "Move," she said. He didn't. "Just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," she said, voice raw. "You used me. You used my kids. This whole time you've been pretending." "I wasn't pretending." She froze. He said it with such conviction that, for a split second, she almost believed him. Then she remembered the conversation in the grocery store, and she remembered who he was. "You don't get to do this," she whispered. "You don't get to act like you're the victim here." His expression darkened. "I'm not." She swallowed. "Then let me go." Andrew hesitated just for a second. Then he stepped aside. Regina didn't look back as she walked out. That night, Andrew sat alone in his office, staring at the empty space where Regina had stood. He should have known this was coming. He had always known that if she found out the truth, there would be no fixing it. But that didn't stop the ache in his chest, because for the first time in his life, he had lost something he actually cared about. And he had no one to blame but himself. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. Andrew had spent weeks adjusting to the chaos of Regina's children filling every room, the constant noise of footsteps on the stairs, laughter echoing down the halls, and even the occasional arguments between siblings. Now, without them, the silence was deafening. He had never thought he would miss it, but he did. He missed the way Caleb would climb onto the couch and babble about dinosaurs while Regina tried to wrangle him into putting on shoes. He missed Jackson and Miles fighting over the last pancake at breakfast. He missed Naomi's sharp, observant questions. He missed the hesitant moments when Tristan would almost acknowledge him before shutting him out again. And he missed Regina. That was the worst part. For weeks, he had convinced himself that this marriage was just a business transaction, that she was just another piece in the game. He had been wrong. She had become something more. And now he had lost her. Regina had done a lot of difficult things in her life, but walking out of Andrew Carradine's mansion was one of the hardest. Not because she wanted to stay, but because for a brief, ridiculous moment, she had actually let herself believe. She had told herself from the beginning that this was just a deal, a means to an end. But somehow, somewhere along the way, it had started to feel real. And that was the most dangerous part because Andrew had never changed. He had never been the man she had started to hope he was. The moment she had found out the truth, it had shattered every fragile piece of trust she had begun to build. And she couldn't afford to rebuild it. She had her children to think about. So, she packed up their things and left. Andrew spent the first few days after her departure trying to focus on work. It didn't help. For the first time in his career, he couldn't concentrate. His mind kept replaying their last conversation, the look in her eyes when she realized the truth. He had seen anger before. He had dealt with disappointment, but the hurt in her expression, that had been something else entirely. And it gutted him. For the first time in his life, Andrew felt truly ashamed. Not because he had lost, but because for once, winning no longer mattered. He had spent years believing that power and control were the only things worth chasing, that emotions were a weakness, and that attachments were nothing more than liabilities. But Regina and her children had proven him wrong. They had shown him that there was more to life than just business deals and financial victories. And now they were gone, because of him. For days he debated whether or not to go after her. He knew she wouldn't want to see him, that she wouldn't believe a single word he said, and she had every right to feel that way. But that didn't mean he was going to give up. So he did the only thing he could think of. He started making things right, not with words, with actions. The first thing Andrew did was return to the place where it had all started, Regina's old neighborhood, the place she had struggled to survive before their marriage, the place where she had worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table for her children. For the first time, he saw it through her eyes. The cracked sidewalks, the boarded-up buildings, the families barely scraping by. He had never really understood what it meant to struggle. Not until now. So he started listening. He spoke with the people who had known Regina before she had become Mrs. Carradine. He heard their stories, their struggles. And then he went further. He found out what had happened to the factory that had shut down years ago, the one Regina had worked at before it had closed, forcing her into the spiral of endless low-wage jobs. And that was when the real guilt set in, because he had been the one responsible for that factory shutting down. It had been a business decision. Just numbers on a page, a way to cut costs and increase profits. But now, standing in the middle of the empty lot where it had once stood, he saw it for what it really was. A mistake. A mistake that had ruined lives. Regina's life, her children's lives. And that was when he made his decision. He couldn't undo the past, but he could fix the future. Andrew sold his company. Not just a piece of it, all of it. It was the biggest financial decision he had ever made. But for the first time, he didn't care about the money. He used the proceeds to establish a foundation for single mothers. He reopened the factory, not as a corporate investment, but as a community project, offering jobs to the families who had been displaced by its original closure. He started funding after-school programs. He invested in housing initiatives. And he did it without putting his name on it. Because this wasn't about him. It was about them. Regina heard about it through other people. She hadn't spoken to Andrew since the night she had walked out, but the news traveled fast. At first, she thought it was a lie, a publicity stunt, but the more she heard, the more she realized that it wasn't. Andrew had changed, not because he wanted her back, but because he had finally understood what mattered. And that was when she allowed herself to think, for the first time, that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth saving. 2 months after she had left, Andrew knocked on her door. She hesitated before opening it. When she finally did, he was standing there, looking different. Not just in his appearance, though he was dressed more casually than she had ever seen him, his usual tailored suit replaced by something normal. No, the real difference was in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. The calculation was gone. What was left was something raw, something real. "I know you don't want to see me," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Regina folded her arms. "Then why are you here?" He exhaled. "Because I needed you to know that I meant it." She frowned. "Meant what?" "That I'm sorry," he said, "not just for the bet, for everything." She studied him, waiting for the catch. But there wasn't one. For the first time, Andrew Carradine wasn't trying to negotiate. He wasn't trying to win. He was just there. And that was what made her finally say, "Come inside." They talked for hours about the past, about the future, about what it would take to rebuild what had been broken. And by the end of the night, when she finally looked at him and said, "Maybe," he knew that maybe was enough, for now. because this time he wasn't looking for a shortcut. He was willing to earn it, no matter how long it took. Regina didn't trust easily, not anymore, not after everything she had been through. So even though she had let Andrew inside that night, even though she had listened to what he had to say, she hadn't given him forgiveness. Not yet. And he seemed to understand that. For once, he didn't try to push. He didn't try to buy his way back into her life. He just showed up, not with gifts, not with empty promises, but with consistency. At first, it was small things. He would check in, but never force a conversation. He would ask about the kids, but never make it seem like he was expecting something in return. And then, slowly, he became present. The first time Andrew saw the children again after the fallout, it was awkward. They had every reason to hate him. He had brought them into his home under false pretenses. He had given them a life of comfort, only for them to find out it was all a lie. But children were different from adults. They didn't hold grudges the same way, and while some of them were hesitant, especially Tristan, others were simply confused. The younger ones didn't fully understand what had happened. All they knew was that Mr. Carradine had disappeared, and now he was back. And the truth was, they had liked having him around. The first time he saw Caleb again, the little boy stared at him for a long time before finally mumbling, "Did you bring dinosaurs?" Andrew had to fight back a laugh. "No dinosaurs today," he admitted, "but maybe next time." Caleb considered this, then nodded as if it was a reasonable deal. That was the first step. The older kids were harder. Naomi was skeptical. Jackson and Miles were cautious. And Tristan was angry. The first time Andrew tried to talk to him, he didn't even get a full sentence out before Tristan cut him off. "We don't need you," he said coldly. Andrew nodded. "I know." Tristan narrowed his eyes. He had clearly been expecting an argument. Andrew didn't give him one. Instead, he said, "But that doesn't mean I don't want to be here." Tristan scoffed. "Yeah? And how long before you decide this isn't worth it?" Andrew didn't answer right away, because the truth was, the old version of him would have walked away by now, but that man didn't exist anymore. So he simply said, "As long as it takes." Tristan didn't respond, but for the first time he didn't walk away either. Regina watched all of this unfold carefully. She had spent so much of her life being let down by people. She had learned the hard way that it was easier to expect disappointment than to hope for something real. So she waited for Andrew to slip up, to prove that this was just another game. But he didn't. Instead, he showed up every day, not just for her, but for the kids. When Miles and Jackson needed help with their math homework, he sat down at the kitchen table with them and went through every problem, patient in a way that surprised even himself. When Naomi asked questions, real, thoughtful questions about why he had done what he had done, he answered honestly. And when Caleb fell asleep on the couch one afternoon, exhausted from playing, Andrew carried him to bed without a second thought. Regina saw all of it, and slowly the walls she had built around herself started to crack. The moment she knew things had truly changed came unexpectedly. It was a Saturday morning. The kids were watching cartoons, the house was filled with the usual noise, and Regina was in the kitchen making breakfast. Andrew walked in, rolling up the sleeves of his shirt. "You need help?" he asked. Regina raised an eyebrow. "Do you even know how to cook?" "Not particularly," he admitted, "but I'm a fast learner." She smirked. "We'll see about that." She handed him a whisk and turned back to the stove, expecting him to hover awkwardly or make some excuse to leave. Instead, he actually tried, and he was terrible at it. Within minutes, there was flour everywhere, and when he tried to flip a pancake, it landed on the floor. The kids erupted into laughter. Regina covered her mouth, shaking her head. Andrew groaned, rubbing his forehead. Okay, maybe this isn't my thing. Regina, still smiling, took the spatula from him. Stick to business, Carradine. He looked at her, and for the first time in a long time she realized she didn't feel angry anymore. She didn't feel betrayed. She just felt okay. She didn't know if she could ever fully forgive him, but she did know that the man standing in front of her now wasn't the same one who had made that cruel bet all those months ago. He was better, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The weeks passed. Andrew continued showing up. And then, one day, Regina did something she hadn't planned. She invited him to stay for dinner. It was a simple thing, but it was also everything. Because it meant she was willing to try. And for Andrew, that was more valuable than any business deal he had ever made. Because for the first time, he wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing something real. And he knew he would do whatever it took to keep it. Regina never thought she'd get to this point. She had spent so long guarding herself, refusing to let Andrew, or anyone, really, get close again. She had convinced herself that the damage he had done was too deep, that no amount of change could erase the betrayal she had felt when she learned the truth about their marriage. And yet, here they were. It wasn't just that he had proven himself to her, it was that he had done so without expecting anything in return. Andrew had shown up day after day, not because he wanted to win her back, but because he had genuinely changed. He had built something real with the kids. He had spent time with them, listened to them, been there for them in ways that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with choice. She had seen him stay up late helping Naomi with the science project, seen him sit on the floor playing with Caleb when the little boy had been too sick to go outside. She had seen the way Jackson and Miles had slowly started looking up to him, the way Ezra had started coming to him for advice. And she had seen how patient he had been with Tristan. Her eldest had fought him at every turn, but Andrew had never once given up. And eventually, even Tristan had relented, just a little. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was something she had never expected. One evening, as she was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, Andrew walked out and sat beside her. It was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I'm leaving the city." Regina turned to him, frowning. "What?" "I'm selling my penthouse, getting rid of what's left of my old life." She stared at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because it doesn't mean anything to me anymore." Regina looked back at the horizon. "And what does?" Andrew exhaled. "This." She turned to him again, searching his face. "I used to think money was everything," he said quietly, "that success was all that mattered. But I've never felt more alive than I have these past few months." He glanced at her. "With you, with the kids." Regina's heart clenched. She wanted to believe him, and for the first time she thought maybe she did, but she was still scared. "Andrew," she started, but he shook his head. "I know I don't deserve an answer right now," he said. "I just wanted you to know." Regina swallowed. He had changed, and she had too. Maybe it was time to stop running from that. The next few months passed in a blur. Andrew became a permanent part of their lives, but not in a way that felt forced. He was just there, present. And that presence changed everything. He showed up to school events. He took the kids on weekend trips. He became someone they could rely on. And, eventually, Regina found herself relying on him too. She still had her walls up, but they were lower now, and she found herself wondering what it would be like to let them fall completely. Then, one evening, Andrew did something she hadn't expected. He proposed, not in a grand, over-the-top way, not like the first time when it had been part of a deal. This time it was just the two of them, sitting on the porch, the crickets chirping in the distance. Andrew pulled a simple ring from his pocket and held it out to her. "I don't want to make another deal with you," he said. "I don't want to buy my way into your life. I just want you and the kids forever." Regina stared at the ring, her heart pounding. She should have been terrified. But for once, she wasn't. Because this wasn't a trick. It wasn't a lie. It was real. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in something again. She looked up at him, then slowly she nodded. Yes. Andrew exhaled as if he had been holding his breath. Then, carefully, he slid the ring onto her finger. And, for the first time in a long time, Regina felt home. Their wedding was nothing like the first. This time it was surrounded by family. The kids were there, all dressed up, laughing, happy. There were no contracts, no deals, just love. And as Andrew held her close that night, Regina finally allowed herself to admit what she had been fighting for so long. She loved him, and he loved her. Not because of a bet, not because of an obligation, but because, against all odds, they had built something real. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to hold on to it. A year later, Regina sat in the hospital, holding their newborn baby in her arms. Andrew sat beside her, staring down at the tiny bundle with something close to awe. The kids were outside, waiting to meet their new sibling, and as she looked at Andrew, she smiled. "We did it," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "Yeah, we did." And as their baby let out a small cry, Andrew reached down, gently running a hand over the tiny fingers. Regina watched him, and in that moment, she knew. They weren't just a family because of circumstance. They were a family because they had chosen each other. And nothing, not a bet, not a past filled with mistakes, could ever change that. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more like it. Watch our other videos for more captivating stories, and don't forget to share this one with your friends. Your support means a lot.